The desire of the Jews to own the land of Palestine, that is, the Zionism movement, started in the 1880s when the Jews of Russia were forced to migrate to Palestine against the anti-Semitism that emerged in Russia, and accelerated with the work of the Jewish journalist Theodor Herzl, Judenstaat, published in 1896. Theodor founded the World Zionist Organization in 1897, after which powerful and wealthy Jews in America and Europe made efforts to establish a Jewish state in Palestine by making attempts before the great powers. During World War I, Zionism first made U.S. President Wilson and then the United Kingdom a partner in its cause. The resulting Balfour Declaration was a turning point for Jewish ambitions in Palestine. In November 1917, British Foreign Secretary Balfour sent a letter to Lord Rothschild, President of the Zionist Federation, in which he announced Britain's acceptance of the establishment of a Jewish state in Ottoman territory. This action was supported the following year by France, Italy, and the United States. The British and French had promised some Arab leaders during the Great War that they would free them from Turkish oppression and grant them independence. But after the war, at the San Remo Conference in 1920, it was decided to establish a Mondo administration in the Middle East territories taken from the Turks, and the territories were divided between these two states, with Lebanon and Syria going to France and Palestine, which had been cut off from Iraq and Syria, going to the British. But ruling the Middle East was not as easy as they thought. It was a matter of curiosity how long these ancient lands, which witnessed the establishment of many empires and the collapse of many others, could accommodate Western Europeans. At the same time, France and Britain were looking for their former power with a candle. Especially the British were busy watching the sun, which they believed did not set over their empire after the Great War, disappear over the horizon. If we look at the events in Palestine in particular, the fact that their desire for independence was pushed aside after the expulsion of the Turks from the region led to a complete disappointment among the Arabs there, and this disappointment led to a great opposition against the British authorities. The attitude of the mandatory state towards the creation of a Jewish homeland in Palestine took the opposition to a whole new level and turned it into hostility. The fact that the British turned a blind eye to the settlement of Jews in Palestine from the first days of the occupation and Mandate administration changed the population balance in the region in an instant. 1918, while the proportion of Jews in Palestine was 7% in 1922, it rose to 12% in 1922 and 20% in 1932. Not only the population balance was changing, but there was also a big difference between the development levels of the two societies. The Jews who migrated to the region were more educated than the Arabs. Most of the Jews who settled in the cities could even get a university education, while the Arabs, more than 85% of whom lived in rural areas, rarely went beyond primary school. In addition, the British offered industrial enterprises and trade opportunities to the Jews, which made the already wealthy Jews' coffers even bigger. Of course, these events caused tension between the Jewish and Arab communities from the very first moments. Civilians in both communities took up arms and established resistance organizations. Especially the Haganah organization, which was established by the Jews and spread all over Palestine, was supported by the British. The frictions between these organizations soon turned into conflicts. Among the most important conflicts, we can count the events in 1921, 1929, 1933.1933-35 when 134,540 Jews immigrated to Palestine between 1937 and 1939. The Palestinian Arabs panicked. With the incitement of Nazi Germany and Fascist Italy, they first rioted. This led to mutual acts of terrorism. The British government, realizing that the wheel had burst and the patch would not hold, decided that the Mandate government would not work. It thought of dividing Palestine between the two groups, but when both sides rejected the Taksim models, the work came to an impasse. 1937 to 1939, the turmoil between the years and the deaths of more than 3,000 people was an indication of why events were getting out of control. The fact that Iraq gained its independence in 1930 and Syria in 1936, albeit on paper, had an impact on the escalation of events. because the Arabs there were closely interested in the Palestine issue. The fact that Jerusalem and its surroundings were sacred for the three biblical religions caused not only the Arabs but also the whole world to pay attention to what was going to happen here. Unable to deal with the issue anymore, Britain presented a plan for the solution of the issue in 1939. According to this plan, a Palestinian state would be established within 10 years in which both nations would have a say in the administration. In addition, Jewish immigration would be limited and the consent of the Arabs would be taken in immigration. The Jews rejected this proposal and took a stand against the British. While the unity and unified speech of the Jews gave them an advantage, the Arabs of Palestine could not act together. Some of them looked positively at the plan presented, while others cursed it. They did not realize it, but their lack of reflexes to act together would cause their lands to be pulled out from under them. Naturally, the war dispersed Britain's focus in the region. On top of that, Nazi Germany's genocide of millions of innocent Jews increased the sympathy for Jews in the world public opinion. The United States wanted more than 100,000 Jews fleeing Europe to be settled in Palestine. The United States, which gradually made its presence felt in the Middle East through its oil companies in the 1960s, was the biggest supporter of Zionism due to the power of the Jewish community in the country. Of course, after the deterioration of relations with the British, the strategic alignment of Zionist thought with the United States led this country to focus on the Palestine issue. 1942. While these statements were being made on the new continent, Haganah, who played the role of the Army of the Jews, secretly settled the immigrants in the country and started ethnic cleansing, despite the British ban. Britain, despite being on the side of the victorious countries, left World War II even more defeated. Unable to prevent the turmoil in Palestine, they declared martial law in 1946. Their aim was to get rid of Palestine, which they were fed up with. When they could not take it anymore, they took the ball out of their feet and passed it to the United Nations. The first idea was to divide the land of Palestine between two communities and create two different states, with Jerusalem having an international status. 56% of the land of Palestine was to be given to the Jews, with the plan based on the division of the country. But the Jews still made up 31% of the population, even after all the emigration. Predictably, the partition could have led to an apocalypse. The second idea was to preserve the territorial integrity of Palestine and create a single federated state. Britain abstained from the vote, while the United States, Soviet Russia and France voted in favor of partition. The reason for the Soviet vote was to sabotage the British, who were the dominant power in the Middle East, because the Russians knew that this decision would cause a stir. Naturally, the Arab world did not accept the UN resolution and the buried war axes were taken out and vows of revenge were sworn. Although the US changed its mind after the harsh reaction of the Arab countries, what had already happened. In these times when the atmosphere became tense and civil war broke out, the British did not try harder for a solution. Their only thought was to get out of these lands, which they had taken from the Turks in their time and could not even rule for 30 years. The British government announced on May 15, 1948 that it would withdraw completely from Palestine. Waiting for the opportunity, the Jews immediately began to occupy their part of the UN partition. The Muslims in the region were either massacred or emigrated. On the last night of the British Mandate, May 14, in the hours connecting May 15, the Jewish National Council in Tel Aviv, under the leadership of David Ben-Gurion, declared the establishment of the State of Israel. A few hours after the declaration, Jordan, Syria, Egypt, Lebanon and Iraq declared war on Israel and the First Arab-Israeli War began. Even before the mandate was lifted, the Yeshuvajans secretly brought weapons purchased from the United States and France to the region, despite the British blockade of the coast. With this shipment, which continued even during the war, the Jews had airplanes, tanks, automatic rifles, cannons and various armored vehicles. At the same time, the Soviets established an air bridge over Czechoslovakia and openly sold arms to the Jews. In addition to the above, They did not feel the need to hide their underground ammunition production when the war started and produced the bullets of the famous Sten rifles in these workshops. Combining all their forces, including terrorist organizations, the Jews would increase the number of soldiers from 30,000 at the beginning of the war to 120,000 towards the end of the war with a general mobilization. The Palestinian side, on the other hand, was very weak. Although their population was much larger than that of the Jews, they could neither raise as many troops as them, nor could they be organized, nor could they have a technological presence. 5. Knowing that the Palestinian Arabs would lose the war even before the war began, the Arab League countries decided to enter Palestine. At the beginning of the war, the 5 states put about 40,000 men on the field, while towards the end this number would increase to 60,000. If we look at the balance of power of the armies of these 5 countries that would enter Palestine, Egyptian and especially Jordanian troops were clearly ahead of the others in every respect. Of course, these countries were very confident in themselves and their armies. Arab leaders even made ambitious statements to the press, saying that they would drive the Jews into the sea. The apparent aim of this overconfident league was to protect the rights of the Palestinian Arabs and not to allow a Jewish state in the region, but none of them cared about the Muslims in Palestine. All of them were acting for their interests and trying to grab a share of the region. The rivalry and ambition among the Arabs also made the resistance organizations in Palestine suspicious and avoid cooperation. In short, it seemed that the Arabs would act far from unity again. The war started with the entry of 5 Arab countries into Palestine. 30,000 Israeli Army. The 30,000-strong Israeli army had its work cut out for it against a firepowered enemy. Egypt advanced in 2 columns in the south. The aim was to bring down Tel Aviv, but the advance was halted at one point by the Jewish brigades. This halt was humiliating for Egypt, which saw itself as the leader of the Arab countries. Iraqi and Syrian forces were initially present, but quickly lost their offensive power. Lebanon, with its meager forces, pulled its head out of the sand and retreated. Only Jordan performed well, entering the West Bank and capturing East Jerusalem. Overall, Israel, which should have been in a difficult position, played a good defense, while the Arabs fell far short of expectations. The first ceasefire was declared on June 11, with the intervention of the UN. The Jews increased their forces to 63,000, while the Arabs continued to fight with some 40,000 troops. The second part of the war centered on Israel's efforts to expand its borders. Despite all the calls for peace and offers of redistribution, the fighting did not stop. While the Arabs sought to annex the settlements they had taken and take more, Israel sought to take all of Palestine and expel the Muslims from the region. They found it difficult to subdue the Arab population in the West Bank, so they expanded north and south. In the north, they took all of Galilee. In the south, they attacked the Egyptians and even defeated the British, taking all of the Najaf Desert. 1949 In the war that continued until the beginning of the war, after the insistence of the UN countries and the successive defeats and incompetence of the Arabs, Israel won a great victory and signed a ceasefire with all the countries it defeated one by one. Because it waged a successful war, it threw aside the map drawn by the UN and announced that it annexed every place it captured to its territory. In the end, when the war ended and the dust settled, the State of Israel emerged, holding almost 3/4 of Palestinian land in its hands. But the State of Israel was not satisfied with that. From those days to the present day, it has continued to occupy the handful of homeland lands left in the hands of Palestinian Muslims, step by step, inch by inch. And while doing so, it has not hesitated to expel hundreds of thousands of people from their homes or to point guns at innocent children.